Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Here we are for the Q&A series for March 2021. And you might notice we have Monitor Steve back. We decided that we're only going to make him drive out once for the live stream that you hopefully would have seen on the channel a couple of days ago. But it's looking a little bit different. It's a slightly unusual Monitor Steve going on at the moment here. So where are you at the moment?
I'm in my shed. I was going to play along and make out that I was lost and I don't know where I've ended up, but somehow there's a streaming PC here. No, I'm in my shed, and the reason for that is, as many of you will probably know, I'm building a new studio, and the builders are currently here. They're going to be here all day, and we couldn't really film later. We sort of had to get this done now because of other things that are happening. So I've come down to my shed where it's a bit quieter. You may occasionally hear a hammer in the background. I'm about 50 meters away from them, but my current studio is right next to the new studio. So there would be a lot of noise in there. So probably wasn't going to work well having nail guns and impact drills and all that sort of stuff going off while we're trying to talk. So I came down here and I think it's working pretty well. So we just did the Patreon live stream down here and that seemed to go well. So hopefully the Q&A videos also go well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different look as well. It gives people a bit of variety from the usual PC stuff. Instead, we can see some tools in the background.
Yes, well, I built this shed, and there are BTS videos, behind the scenes videos of me building this shed on Floatplane and Patreon accounts. So if you're interested, you could go check that out. But anyway, it's working well for this, so I'm glad I've got it.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get into some non-shed building stuff, into some PC hardware related questions.
Today's video is sponsored by Gigabyte and their brand new range of Radeon RX 6700 XT graphics cards, including the Gaming OC and Aorus Elite. The Gaming OC is a high quality yet minimalistic graphics card, whereas the Aorus Elite adds a little extra bling with its RGB Fusion 2.0 lighting. Both models pack large triple-slot WindForce 3X coolers featuring direct-touch heat pipes, a full-size aluminium backplate, and they're overclocked out of the box for maximum gaming performance. So for more information, please check the link in the video description.
All right, so we've got a question here from Joey the Saint. I think it's about Linus. So is this the first time we've ever answered a question about Linus in some of these Q&As?
I mean, he's so big now, it makes sense that he's palming these things off to us. So.
All right, so the question is, when Nvidia tried to cancel Hardware Unboxed, Linus Sebastian said, Nvidia, this is unacceptable, and the next day you had a public letter of apology from BDR himself on your desk. Fast forward to Nvidia nerfing RTX 3060 hash rate when mining, and Linus again said, Nvidia, this is unacceptable, and basically the next day Nvidia leaked a driver that removed that nerf for a specific use case scenario, gamers that want to recoup some of the GPU costs through mining themselves. So, just how much power does Linus have exactly? Well, he's certainly the biggest player in the space, isn't he? And
yeah,
I'd say that his influence, especially on that Nvidia situation with us, really did help to get that solved quickly and effectively. So, I guess you have to say he has quite a bit of pull. Not sure how much influence he had on that mining situation, though.
Yeah, maybe connecting a few too many dots there. Not sure on that one. We obviously have a bit more insight into our own issue there with Nvidia. And yeah, as Tim said, Linus obviously helped immensely there, which we very much appreciate. And there were others as well. Jay got involved and many other channels. So we appreciate the support from all the community. But as for just how much power does Linus have exactly? Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly, but obviously, yeah, he's very influential and has a huge following. So, yeah, you kind of have to pay attention to what he's saying, and clearly, Nvidia have.
Right. Next question is an interesting one. Chip shortage. What is actually in shortage? Silicon, components, power delivery, resistors, substrate, PCB, VRAM. I was wondering all the time because here in the EU, we have plenty of motherboards at normal prices, even sometimes in promos, and the GPUs are in low stock, CPUs are in semi-normal prices, notebooks also. Or did the shortage that is coming to an end and we don't have GPUs only because of miners? So obviously we've talked a bit about this being a fairly complex situation. There's many different factors. Don't want to rehash all the various different things at play, but it does sound like the majority of the shortages for GPUs are coming from Well, firstly, the nodes. So your fabrication at Samsung, your fabrication at TSMC being maxed out for those things, at least maxed out in the yields necessary at those, Nvidia, when they buy Samsung, they buy a certain amount of wafers, they need a certain amount of yields. That's being maxed out. So that's one thing. It also does still seem like VRAM is limited. So your GDDR memory, that being caused by not just GPUs, but also the consoles. Also, the consoles using some of the silicon supply. So those seem to be the majority of the current supply constraints. There was also some constraints around the recent Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, where in February, companies take 2 to 3 weeks off in, the China area. Everyone goes on a holiday, so obviously there's no manufacturing through that period. That also causes a supply issue, but that's, by all reports, sort of been resolved at this point because everyone's back at work, factories are operating, and a lot of the COVID-related stuff is also they've worked through a lot of that stuff at this point. So, yeah, the shortage doesn't seem to be as much for things like your surface level components as much anymore, which is why things like motherboards, the substrates, the actual silicon that goes into making a PCB, a lot of those things seem to be getting resolved. And obviously as well, motherboards can often be made many, many months ago and sit on shelves for quite some time, which is going to impact this as well. So yeah, it does seem like obviously supply is still constrained for a number of these things, but there is still supply. So depending on the parts that require certain things, obviously products that don't require as much VRAM and as much silicon components produced at Samsung or TSMC is going to have an advantage in being able to produce those. So yeah, that's pretty much the situation there. Have you got anything else to add to that?
No, I think you covered that very thoroughly. Nothing else to add.
Yeah, I've actually been hearing a little bit that some display panel manufacturers are having supply issues as well. Not necessarily that, they're struggling to find the raw materials to make panels, but the demand is so high that they're flying off the shelves. But that's only affecting some of the manufacturers and not all of them. So again, It does depend on the size of the manufacturer, what they're putting stuff into. So something like a laptop, demand for those screens may not be as significant as for a different size of the panel that may be used in a monitor that's flying off the shelves. So yeah, I guess there's currently a bit of a explanation for that. But I think the good news is that with a lot of these components, it's not that there's been a hit to manufacturing. So like, we were producing X amount of GDDR memory or X amount of resistors, and suddenly we're only producing half that amount. It is really the demand that's causing a lot of those supply issues, and just everyone wants resistors, everyone wants, PCBs, all that sort of stuff. Mako asks, Intel has its own fabrication plants and doesn't seem to have been as affected as AMD or Nvidia during this chip shortage. Do you think that Intel has a great opportunity to make a big entrance with its discrete graphics cards if they manage to get acceptable gaming performance for a reasonable price? Do you think they will have better stock than AMD and Nvidia? Well, I think if they were launching a product immediately, so like right now, then they would probably have a bit of an advantage. Their CPUs aren't super popular for the enthusiast desktop market, which is why I guess they have been able to supply quite a number of them. Demand isn't super high, and demand for CPUs in general clearly isn't as high as graphics cards. So if they allocated some of their 14 nanometer supply or 10 nanometer or whatever they decide to make it on to graphics cards, then yeah, potentially that could work. But it doesn't really sound like the high performance graphics cards that they're producing are ready to launch right now. And on top of that, I believe some of the products that they're making are actually being produced on TSMC, and some of them are being produced in their internal nodes. I don't quite remember the split that they're using, whether all of the gaming products or just some of the gaming products is supposed to be used on external fabs, but so that's going to complicate things as well, because obviously if they're using TSMC, they're not going to get the benefits of using their own fabs and reducing the shortage. So I think if you're talking longer term, when Intel actually has these cards available, we're probably going to be towards the tail end of the supply shortage issue. Maybe high-end products, we've talked about this in like our live stream a couple of days ago, potentially the solution to the shortage thing is in the future, like your mid-range and low-end cards will be more available. High-end cards might still be out of stock until next year. And then if Intel's only launching like a mid-range card into a market where there's plenty of stock, that's not going to be advantageous to them either. So I think they've kind of missed the boat a little bit on that one, and they're probably just going to be competing in a normal market for better or worse. And yeah, so we'll just have to see how that plays out once Intel is finally ready to launch their new GPUs. All right, next question. Do you expect that Thermo-Electric coolers will gain any meaningful popularity with more extreme overclockers or even just users in general over time? Or do you think it's more of a solution looking for a problem? So I assume this is based on the new collection of Thermo-Electric coolers that we're seeing to use with 11th gen Intel CPUs. I believe there was some sort of partnership between Intel and a couple of the cooling brands to get those coolers out on the market. I'm pretty sure overclockers and extreme overclockers have been using these sorts of coolers for quite some time. Obviously, it's more of a niche thing. You have to occasionally design your own sort of cooler, similar to the LN2 stuff. It is a very niche application. So I wouldn't say that it's only now coming into the overclocking market. I think it has been around for a while, but I'm pretty sure it will stay there. This does not seem like a very sustainable solution for your sort of general users. The coolers are very expensive, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, a lot more expensive than your standard air coolers and AIOs. And then you only really need them if you were doing extreme overclocking, which most users don't do. So in those situations, air and liquid coolers are going to be fine. So yeah, don't think it's going to be super popular, but I guess you never know.
All right, next one here. During the clock-for-clock testing of the 5700 XT/6700 XT, did the power draw from the 6700 XT drop to 50% of the 5700 XT while maintaining the same performance? So quite a few people asked about power consumption and why it was missing from that content. And that was done deliberately because although we're reducing the performance of the 6700 XT to clock for clock match the 5700 XT, we're not greatly improving its efficiency. We're probably not putting it in its efficiency window there because we're not tuning the voltages. Like, I don't know what optimal voltage it would require for only 1.8 gigahertz operation. And I was also going the opposite way by having to max out the power target of both cards to make sure they stayed pretty well pegged at 1.8 gigahertz. If you leave the power target stock, the clock speeds fluctuate all over the place, and it's not a very good clock-for-clock comparison. So the way I tested was an awful way of testing for getting accurate power figures. So I deliberately didn't include those because they would be misleading, and I don't even recall exactly what they were. I didn't really look at them properly because I already knew that the way I was testing was just going to be misleading information.
Yeah, that's right. I think these questions are coming up because people want to see whether AMD's claims of RDNA 2 being 50% more efficient than RDNA 1 is accurate. They want to know the answer to that. But
that's right.
But in that comparison, it's not just one thing clocked at the same thing as the other thing, and then power consumption is 50% less or 33% less, whatever you need for that exact number.
That's right.
Or alternatively, they have the same power, but one is 50%, giving you 50% more performance. They're making that metric based on the exact balance that's appropriate for both of those designs. So RDNA, when they measure RDNA 2 versus RDNA 1, they're including the fact that it's going to be more powerful into that equation. So it might be some of the efficiency is gained from power being a little bit lower, and then the rest of it is from performance being higher. And that's where they get to that 50% number. But then when you change all the other stuff, because it's non-linear, it could become a situation where you drop the clock speeds a little bit and you're not losing as much power because it's the design is more optimized for a higher clock speed. So yeah, with those comparisons, I guess it would be interesting to see how it would go, but I don't think it would really be useful for disproving or proving AMD's claims because it's running outside the spec you'd expect.
That's right. I did my best to head off this sort of thing in that content piece, and in the conclusion I said basically stock for stock, we're looking at on average, and again, we don't know, AMD doesn't have to be giving like, a 20 game average. They can be, and you can probably rest assured they're doing best case scenario stuff here. It's a company, they all do it. But we've seen on average that the 6700 XT is 30% faster than the 5700 XT while using around 15% less power. So to get to the 50% efficiency improvement, I mean, it's not a big stretch.
It's not.
You pick a select range of games and boom, you've got it. So, the claim is not, it's certainly not absurd. They haven't really stretch the truth on that one. Let's say it's pretty easy to prove it.
Yep.
That's the case. All right. Is the Ryzen 9 5900X worth it over the 3900X in the climate of hardware unavailable, especially where the 3900X is £150 cheaper in my region? I guess it depends on what other components you have and why you're upgrading and what it is that you want the extra performance for potentially. It's one of those things where it's just like, it's difficult for me to say for you. Are you really seeking like maximum, for example, with the 5900X, is it like you're a professional gamer that's looking to do a bit of streaming and you're hoping to do all of that on the CPU? In that case, yeah, the 5900X may be worth the investment. If you're sort of gaming in the way that Tim does, so you're targeting 1440p ultra wide or 4K with high quality visuals, the difference between the 5900X and the 3900X is just very, very small. We're talking about a couple of % difference, if anything. So it's so hard for me to say whether it's worth it or not.
All right, next question. So Steve and Tim, I'm a bit of a casual gamer, but recently I discovered NiceHash. Now the various GPUs that I've purchased for myself and other family members over the years are pumping out a combined 220 megahashes per second and spending much more time mining than they are gaming. I'm also finding myself scouring Facebook Marketplace, looking to sneak a few more 1660 Supers and TIs into the mix. Tell me guys, how did I become part of this GPU problem, and how can I break my psychological addiction to mega hash mania? Nice question. Just switch it off. Just turn it off. Get back to gaming. There's really nothing that you can do about this. I mean, as a serious answer, I guess for mining, it's kind of a situation where if you can make a little bit of cash on the side, I can totally see how people would kind of get addicted to that situation. You add one card in, I'm making $5, $10 a day, add a second one in, you're making another $5 or $10 a day, and suddenly you've got 10, 20 GPUs, and you're starting to make hundreds of dollars a day, and that becomes pretty significant income. So yeah, I can totally understand people that want to do this, especially on a casual basis, with GPU pricing being absolutely insane right now. You're spending $1,000 on a GPU, so you might want to try and recoup some of that on mining. I understand that. It's not for me. It's not really for Steve either. But yeah, hopefully over time for you, you will find that the cryptocurrency market will crash and all that investment will be worthless. So that's what I think everyone is hoping for you at the moment.
Yeah, as for how much of the GPU problem you are, while contributing to that problem, let's say, insignificant. It's not really, I don't believe, again, not an expert on this whole mining thing, but I don't believe it to be guys or gamers who are trying to make a bit of money on the side.
Exactly.
Because primarily they bought their GPU for gaming. Yeah, you are trying to scrounge together a few more of them, but it's really mining farms that are buying thousands, if not tens of thousands of these things. That's what's really driving up the demand. But as we've said in the past as well, it's not just cryptocurrency. While that's one of the bigger contributing factors, we were sort of being faced with shortages anyway due to other reasons we've talked about in other content pieces. So that there are a few different things going on in the industry right now.
I think the part in this question as well, you talking about going on Facebook Marketplace looking for like 1660 Supers. I mean, you're buying used GPUs there, and normally in a normal market, like the interest in used 1660 Supers is pretty low. Like they're not a high commodity item. So by buying used mid to low end GPUs, you're not really contributing nearly as much to the problem as you say, mining farms that are sucking up 3080s, 3070s, which are much faster and more efficient at mining. So yeah, I mean, that's not a big problem. If you were going out and making contracts with different vendors to try and buy like bulk units, 20, 10, 20, 50 of these GPUs, then you might be a problem, but not in this situation. All right, Nick asks, one of our long-time Patreon members, it's been over 2 years since the introduction of the first G-Sync Ultimate displays, and there hasn't exactly been a ton of HDR 1000 displays released since then. Have your industry contacts said why there haven't been a ton of G-Sync Ultimate displays in the market? And I know this is coming from probably Nick is very interested in these monitors. I believe he uses an ultra-wide, one of the ultra-wide G-Sync Ultimate displays. He's probably wondering what the next upgrade for him will be. The simple answer to this is that monitor makers rely exclusively on the panel manufacturers. So companies like Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, Acer, especially Asus and Acer, who generally do these G-Sync Ultimate displays, they don't make the panels. They're relying on companies like AU Optronics, LG Display, the other ones that I can't remember quite off the top of my head, Samsung, although it's mostly AU Optronics for the G-Sync Ultimate displays. There's many other brands, Panda, BOE, all those brands. And development has been very, very slow on those particular HDR 1000 displays. In particular, there's a lack of competition. Almost all of the panels that you saw from the first wave have been from AU Optronics. And when there's only one brand that's really investing in those super high-end monitors, then you're going to run into issues. We really need to have companies like LG and Samsung also coming to the table with proper HDR panels, which is more happening right now. So yeah, there's basically just a development backlog there where I would expect that those panels are quite expensive to make, especially the ones that have lots of, backlighting zones for those ultimate G-Sync experiences. So yeah, potentially they were waiting for them to be a little bit cheaper. I mean, we don't really want to see more $2,000, $3,000 monitors going up against OLED TVs that are only $1,500, $2,000 that offer better HDR. So I think it's sort of a combination of all those factors, and I would expect that what we're hearing now are things like Steve's favorite, the 32-inch 4K 140 for its monitors with HDR that he's looking forward to. A lot of those monitor panels are starting in mass production right now. We should start seeing those throughout this year. So I'd expect there to be almost like a second wave of these monitors coming out, and more with HDR available. But don't expect them to be cheap. I'm still expecting thousands and thousands of dollars, unfortunately. Will you guys be testing the 11th gen Rocket Lake S CPUs on the previously Value Z490 segment boards that have gotten your thumbs up, assuming Z590 will definitely happen, which, assuming you'll be doing some VRM testing there. As data reviews so far indicate higher core count 11th gen parts are more demanding for the VRM, or just that they run really hot with AVX 512 workloads. Granted, it's still very niche to use in the consumer realm. So, what are you doing? You testing Rocket Lake on Z490?
Don't know. I'm testing a lot of Z590 motherboards. We already have over 20 of them. So that's where the focus will be, gathering data on boards that we've never tested before. As for going back and looking at boards that we've already tested, like the value boards that got the thumbs up, yeah, look, that's something we could go back and do if there's enough demand. So if things change drastically from what they're looking like right now, it doesn't seem like too many people, especially our viewers, are super excited for the 11th gen based on reviews that we've seen from Anantech, Gamers Nexus, and many other media outlets. Of course, we haven't done our review yet, but yeah. So we've got a lot of Z590 to look at. So we'll focus on getting that out of the way, and even that will be gauging. There's no point spending weeks upon weeks of positioning thermal probes and running stress tests and gathering data, making sure the room temperature is correct and doing all that stuff. It's very tedious and very time consuming. So it's got to be worth it ultimately. And what makes it worth it for us is if you guys find it useful. So yeah, but anyway, it's possible. Let's just say that. Okay, do 6-core, 6-thread Skylake parts like the 8600K have enough performance compared to the i3-10100 to avoid the unusual scaling problems with Nvidia GPU drivers at the resolution and setting combos you tested with? Well, I'm hoping that my video that answers this question very thoroughly is already on the channel, but it actually should be by this point. And basically, the video that I'm talking about, I tested the Core i5-9400F, which is a very similar CPU. Probably doesn't clock quite as high, but quite similar. And the answer is, it depends. It depends on mainly the memory that you're using. For today's games anyway. So I found with the 9400F, if you use dual rank, dual channel, 3200 low latency, CL14 memory, in a lot of instances you can avoid it in most instances. But if you use with the locked part, the more standard, DDR4 2666 CL16 timings, let's say, single rank dual channel, so just a more typical, more affordable memory kit, you're probably not using Samsung B die with 4 sticks, then yeah, you can run into that problem with that processor. A lot of people have been asking, and a lot of people asked for this Q&A series, here's my hardware configuration. Is my hardware going to run into this issue? And so rather than address 10,000 of those questions, the easiest way to address this for you is your 6-core, 6-threaded Skylake processor seeing like 80 to 100% utilization in the games you're playing, or the game you're playing, or whatever it may be? Because if that's happening, especially with a Radeon GPU, if you're seeing 80 to 100% utilization with a Radeon GPU, performance will go backwards with a GeForce GPU. It just will happen, especially if we're talking DirectX 12 games. DirectX 12 games, it will absolutely go backwards by anywhere from 10 to 20%.
Yeah, and we're talking, to be clear, this is 80 to 100% across all the CPU cores. So it's not
total
sufficient.
CPU.
Total CPU usage. It's not sufficient to just have one core being pegged at 80 to 100%. We're talking
that's right.
Total CPU usage.
Total CPU, which is why DirectX 12, because DirectX 12 should spread that load evenly across the available cores and threads, especially when you've only got 6 of them. So, yeah, really, you can answer this question yourself by using your favorite, let's say like an Afterburner with Riva Tuner type setup. Load that up. Put the CPU. You can just use total CPU utilization. You don't have to look at the individual cores and threads. See what the utilization is in the games you're playing. But if they're Battlefield 5, Call of Duty Warzone, Fortnite, for example, especially using the DirectX 12 version, those type of games with the processor you're talking about there will see fairly high or very high CPU utilization, and the Radeon GPUs will deliver smoother, higher performance. So that's probably the easiest way I can answer that. But yeah, it's really about mainly DirectX 12 games, high CPU utilization. That's where the Radeon GPUs can offer you 20% more overhead for a 20% boost in frame rate and typically smoother frame time performance.
All right, and I think we'll cut this one right about here. We've answered a good range of questions, some interesting stuff, bit of a mix between Patreon and Floatplane questions, a bit of YouTube questions thrown in there as well. And I think we'll continue that over the remaining parts this month, because we've got a ton of very interesting questions from our wonderful supporters. So if you're interested in signing up and adding to that group of questions that we'll answer in next month's Q&A, you can do so via the links to Patreon and Floatplane in the description below. You'll also, apart from just getting access to the Q&A question stuff, you'll be able to post in our Discord, which is a really great community. You get access to our live streams like the one we just did today. And what else? Behind the scenes videos about Steve building sheds and using tools and his love of tools and all that stuff. What else?
I don't know. I think you've covered all the things that we do.
Pretty much. It's pretty much just PC hardware, sheds, Lego. You do a bit of fishing. So that's pretty much it. That's us in a nutshell. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And we'll catch you again next time. I'm your host, Steve. I'm your host, Tim. See you in the next one. See you next time.